Hey everybody, we have just started recording. We've got Frank Golbeck with us here. This is Wayne. And Frank and I have got our webcams on. We've got Mark and Arif behind the glass, as they say. We were talking earlier today about a movie that I saw over the weekend on Netflix called Extraction. And it's supposedly filmed in Mark's hometown or home city in Bangladesh, Dhaka. But according to Arif, who also had seen it, he said it's not filmed there at all. It's filmed in India somewhere. Isn't that right? Isn't that what you said, Arif? So it's not the location they say it is.
Yep.
Anyway, I was excited. I thought I was seeing Mark's home. So anyway, we've got Arif and Mark and Frank, and we've had Frank on with us once before, and we loved that session, so we invited him to come back. We want to get an update from him on where he's gone with his mead business and other things that he does. He and I first met at Permaculture Voices 2 in San Diego, and we were just kind of guessing. We both thought it was probably 5 years ago, and we've just stayed in touch ever since. And I haven't kept updated. Sorry about my foot crossing in front of my camera there. I haven't stayed updated on his just current status in a while. So we're going to start for about 10, 15 minutes and ask him a bunch of questions. And then he's got a presentation to do. Arif's going to help sort of scroll through his website as we talk. And at the end, we'll get some questions from you guys. Matter of fact, if during the presentation, if it makes sense to ask them, we'll do that also. Why don't you do us a favor? And in that little question box that you have, put where you're at in the world and put in some ones if you're hearing us all right. I'm going to open my box up here real quick so I can see it. And then there we go. We've got Alicia on, who's become a regular for us, and she says hi. So Frank, why don't you say hi? Just give us a short summary about where you're at in your business world and sort of with COVID going on and kind of where it might be different if it wasn't happening, kind of what you're up to.
Thanks, Wayne. Yeah, so I'm Frank Golbeck. I run Golden Coast Mead down in Oceanside, California, north part of San Diego County. We make alcohol from honey. Mead's arguably the oldest alcohol in the world. All you need is honey and water and fermentation, so yeast. And there's archaeological evidence of people drinking it 7,000 BC, so 9,000 years ago. To give you a little update on what's been going on, we run a tasting room and 4 farmers markets when such things are allowed. And then we have online business as well and a bit of local distribution. With COVID, it's cut down the tasting room and farmers market. Local distribution's pretty much quiet, so we're pretty much all online right now and doing local pickups with all the sanitization measures and face masks and everything. And luckily, business is stable enough to keep the lights on and keep the people paid, so very grateful for that. And we're still moving forward on some big projects that we're excited about and seeing the mead industry really move forward. So would be happy to talk to other ecologically minded entrepreneurs, economic entrepreneurs about mead and what opportunity it presents, because we like to think that it's the most most sustainable and regenerative beverage that's possible from an alcohol production standpoint. Mead is really great. You don't need to tear up nature to make it. You just need bees on top of healthy ecosystems gathering nectar from flowering plants. So as mead expands as a business model, that means there's an economic incentive to plant more plants, create more nectar, and then all the benefits of sequestering carbon, sequestering groundwater, increasing biodiversity, all that good stuff happens as a byproduct of the mead industry. And not to mention beekeeping health and honeybee health and beekeeper livelihoods. So happy to dive into all that more, but that's just a basic overview while people pop in, and stoked to be here. Thanks.
Awesome. So I think when we last talked, you were you were in a fundraising stage, did you get that accomplished, and sort of what was the structure of it? Did you have to give up a lot, or are you still pretty much staying in control?
So what's been great is we raised over 500K in that round, and it was all really friendly capital. Everyone that jumped in really believes in what we're doing, sees the quality of the product, and believes in the ability of that product to make an impact and shift the market. So, we've been able to maintain control, but I think more so we've built a community of co-owners who really value what we're doing and have been a huge resource for us over the last 2.5 years as we've navigated growth and chased some big opportunities and come up short sometimes. But at the end of the day, we have a solid local business that keeps the lights on and the people paid. So we're able to kind of regroup and then take our lessons learned and then get back after it. So we're hoping as this COVID thing evolves, we'll have 2 big contracts that'll really give us a lot more gas to invest in the kind of regenerative visionary aspects of the business.
And I might be remembering this wrong, but at least at some point when we talked, on your sort of not on the business side, but maybe on your living circumstance side, were you living in a little bit of I'll call it a collaborative community living circumstance?
Yeah.
Maybe one of our members, Silas Bennett, might have been in a similar situation. You guys might have known each other. Is that right? Am I remembering that properly?
So Silas is out in East County, San Diego, but yeah, we've collaborated a little bit. And then Cody Harrison,
Cody, yeah,
touch with. He lived on the property for a couple of years and really helped us get it going. So yeah, we've got 2.5 acres with multiple units on it, and that has given us some income diversification and some ground to do some practical application and testing and different stuff. So at one point we had a living pool pond aquaponics system going. We've regenerated an acre of soil that was just compacted red brick dirt using vetiver grass and 3 kinds of earthworms, and basically the water from the pond to inoculate all of that microbial activity. And it's been really cool. We've gone from a $1,000 water bill down to a $250 water bill every month. I could go on, but yeah, we are very lucky to have this place.
And you say so at any given time, how many other residents would be there? And are they in tiny homes? Are they in more temporary kinds of, what would be the other lodging?
Yeah, at one point we had 14 people living on the property. We are down to 9, which feels a bit more stable. With 14, there are just a lot more, I went to UC Berkeley and I lived in the co-ops, the cooperative housing, where the students were owners and we managed the housing ourselves. So really learned a lot about communication and project management and personnel management in a way, though it's much more collaborative. The word personnel management kind of has a top-down feeling to it, right? But with this kind of situation, it's much more egalitarian and peer-to-peer. So there was a lot of communication. We've been doing this for 5 years now, and it's wonderful. We're really lucky to be here during this time. But it takes an investment of time and energy and a sense of like shared communication agreements. So Diane Leaf Christian, who wrote the book Creating a Life Together. She edited the Intentional Community magazine for 30 years. She talks about these 4 gems of community, and the first one is having fun together. The second one's effective communication. So she doesn't prescribe a certain form of communication, but typically like nonviolent communication is a great tool to use. But she says that you need to have some way for people to feel heard and get their point across. And there were just points where nodes in the community didn't seem to be doing that. And we hadn't really untangled how to set the culture so that there was a framework for communication that would allow those conflicts or issues to be resolved. And so then people would kind of just roll out, and then their projects would kind of roll out with them. So we've kind of found this common denominator of wanting a little neighborhood within a neighborhood. And so the R&D on the regenerative impact has kind of dialed back, but that's allowed us to focus more on the mead making.
Cool. Have you either accidentally or on purpose ended up having anybody that's lived there with you become employees or associates, whatever you call people that work with you on the mead side?
Yep. Multiple, and that's been really a great gift. As the business unfolds and new needs pop up, and then you're thinking, oh, who could fall in here? Well, here's a trusted party who has the skill set. Let me see if they're available. And sure enough, they link in, and then those relationships have lasted a couple of years, and then they've moved on as their skills have increased and their opportunities increase elsewhere. So that's been pretty cool. It was not intended, but it's been a nice upside.
So I'm going to ask one more question about that, then I'm going to let you go on to your presentation. And by the way, everybody probably knows I live in a very similar sort of situation, a little more land, but we have a collaborative community here. At any given point, various numbers of people who live. So my last question related to that is what would you say your churn rate is? In other words, if someone's there, you've been doing it 5 years, what's the average length of time that people will be staying?
I'd say 1.5 to 2 years. How about you?
And that's longer than mine. I'm not that long. I bet if you took the average, we're closer to 3 or 4 months. But we actually sort of try to attract people sometimes for shorter term also. So that's somewhat intentional. I got to make this comment just because you might not be seeing it. We have somebody really famous that's with us that just put something in the Q&A. And I know I'm going to say this jokingly, but Michael Jordan's here with us. And just shows you what can happen during that. So I don't think it's the same Michael Jordan that most people probably are thinking about, but it's still Michael Jordan, and he said hi.
If you know the mead world, Michael Jordan is kind of famous, for sure. Hey,
okay.
Yeah, he's doing some great stuff. He turned me on to some traditional mead making from Viking times that's pretty wild. They're just throwing the whole beehive in there and letting the wax cap create this barrier. Anyways, we can dive in there. Also, Wayne, I heard that Joel Salatin's into mead. Can you corroborate this?
I have heard it. I'm not going to fully corroborate it, but I heard it from his son-in-law, and that's not a bad source. So, and that's someone who's been one of our speakers and back there on the East Coast. So yeah, I've heard that. And Joel's been a little more quiet lately. He's a little bit on the more retired side. So I'll ask him directly. You kind of
cool. Yeah, I would love to get Joel's help. Reading You Can Farm when I was getting out of the Navy just really inspired me and encouraged me to make the leap. So he's been a huge role model, I guess. Yeah. Well,
let me just turn it over to you now. Reed's been scrolling through some cool stuff, so people have been able to read a little bit of on your website. But why don't you take it over? I think you're going to take over the slides and show them. And go as long
I'm
as you'd
going to
like,
make-
and when we're done, we'll chat a little bit more.
Great. Well, thanks, guys. So I'm going to go ahead and show my screen, which is exciting, and then we'll get the presentation going here.
By the way, I'm going to mute my camera in just a minute, everybody, so I'm not distracting here. So don't worry, I'm around still. Just going to mute it.
Sweet. All right. I bet let's see. Arib, can you see my webcam and then all these things? Is that kind of in the way?
Yep.
Yep, yeah, this is Wayne. We can see the webcam and on your screen, so it is there.
All right, so all right, let's just do that, and then I'll remember that I'm in here. Cool. All right. So thanks so much for joining, guys, and thanks for the opportunity to share about our regenerative mead. We have been doing this for 10 years now, and before that, I was 19 when I got my first bottle of mead. My grandfather gave it to me. He was an apple grower here in Southern California, up in the foothills of the San Bernardino Mountains. And my family grew apples there for about 100 years. When my grandfather retired from growing apples, he fermented a little bit of everything. Apple wine, grape wine, berry wine. And then I remember being 8 years old, and he would pour this golden drink and in little 1 ounce taster, cups. And to my 8-year-old eyes, it was just magic. He would pour them for these grumpy, scary old people, and these grumpy, scary old people would start laughing and being friendly after having 1 ounce of it. So what is this stuff? It's this golden potion. And my grandpa's like, oh, it's the adult drink made from honey. So that's how mead kind of came into my field of awareness. And I was helping my grandpa clean out the attic when I was 19, so some 11 years later. I'd read all the stories about mead in between, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Beowulf, all these great stories where warriors and Vikings and elves and wizards and all these people are drinking this stuff. And I'm like, that's the stuff my grandpa made. I saw that in real life. And sure enough, we're cleaning out the attic in the garage, and there's this box in the corner. I'm like, I recognize that box. And I make my way over to it over the course of the afternoon, and we pull out these bottles, and there's a bottle of grape wine, a bottle of apple wine, and the last bottle we pull out is his last bottle of mead. So he gives it to me, and I'm stoked. I take it up to college with me, share it with my girlfriend at the time. She's now my wife, and we just had this rose-colored evening. It was absolutely beautiful. And the next summer we started making it. So it's been 14 years of making mead. It's been a journey. Traveling the world with the Navy after undergrad, I saw that there were honeys from all over the world made from the nectar of all different kinds of flowers. And the flavor of those honeys reflected those ecosystems, reflected those flowers. So like longan fruit honey from Thailand or acacia honey from Africa. It started to really get me excited because mead could turn from something that was fun to drink and fun to make for friends into something that reflected a place and reflected a part of the world that I had been to and wanted to share with other people. So kind of pulling that string, we started a business. My wife asked me what I would do while I was in the Navy if I had all the time, money, and energy in the world. And I was like, oh, that's a strong question. What if I had all the time, money, and energy in the world, right? It's this start from abundance idea that if you had everything you could want or need, what would you do in that state? And I sat with that question for a little bit, and I thought to myself, I would farm and live in community and make and share mead. So she said, all right, that sounds great. Let's figure out that. Well, here we are 10 years later, still figuring that out to an extent, but excited about the prospects and with a lot of progress under our belt. So wanted to share with you what we're doing in California, and there's a lot of avenues that this could go. We've been helping other people start meaderies. So I've got 14 meaderies under my belt now, which is super exciting. So if other people are interested in that, I could help them. So my contact info will be at the end of the presentation. I am also just really excited about mead. I think that, again, as I mentioned to Wayne earlier, mead changes the face of the earth, as opposed to beer and wine that need monoculture to produce the sugar at the root of the fermentation. Bees just need flowering plants to produce honey, and that's our sugar for the production of mead. So in order to make more mead, we need more honey. In order to make more honey, we need more flowering plants. So that means that beekeepers can work with landowners and can work with ecological stewards or regenerators to produce more biodiverse landscapes that produce nectar-producing flowering plants. So the model of the expanded mead business means more plants, sequestering carbon, capturing groundwater, producing more biodiversity, supporting more life. It's arguably the regenerative alcoholic libation. So I'm going to dive into a project that we're working on here in California to kind of illustrate that, but know that this project could be reproduced in other parts of the world. So as we all know, today monoculture agriculture is depleting soil. This is a picture from the Central Valley, about 3.5 hours from my house. Just so sad, right? Reduced biodiversity, lost habitat, climate change, soil degradation, increased reliance on chemical inputs. It's not good. So it's not just conventional agriculture, it's also alcohol production that rely on this monoculture. And we can think about human activity on a spectrum from extractive to sustainable to regenerative, right? So extractive is we're taking away from the system and reducing the system's capacity. Sustainable means we can just keep doing something and it can persist. Regenerative means through our activity, we are actually increasing the system's capacity. So that is where we want to go and where we want to connect with more people that are doing that kind of work like you guys. So as we know, bees are primarily kept for pollination these days, right? Honey is kind of a byproduct of the beekeeping business model. Guys are putting bees on the back of semi trucks and driving them to the Central Valley to pollinate the almonds. That's how a lot of beekeeping operations make the majority of their revenue. But that means that they're exposed to pesticides, disease, stress, which are the synergistic causes of colony collapse disorder, where bees just kind of disappear from the hive without much evidence as to why they disappeared. So they call it the synergistic effects of these root causes. And wine and beer are kind of part of the whole system, right? We've created these giant monocultures that can be farmed efficiently. If you're looking at it from a myopic farm operation only perspective, to produce the barley for the beer and the grapes for the wine. But we know from a systems impact, it's bad for groundwater, it's bad for biodiversity, it's bad for soil health. It increases use of pesticides in the system, and then downstream, they all collect and create dead zones. We got to change the monoculture if we're going to have a sustainable culture here on Earth. So we got to regenerate our agriculture and hopefully regenerate our alcohol production, which is a $1 trillion industry alongside food. So what we drink has an impact. So what if we could make a drink that conserves habitat, strengthens biodiversity, regenerates soil, and helps the bees thrive? What if we could make a drink that is tastier, healthier, and better for the earth? My friends, we can. Here it is. Yeah, mead. It's 10,000 flowers in one sip. It's a delight to drink. When it's made well, it's like drinking sunshine and flowers. That's what Tolkien said about mead. It makes people just light up, and it makes a dinner party just full of buzzing people, because you don't need to drink a lot, and we don't encourage people to drink a lot. We're like 1 to 2 glasses with friends is kind of the recommended serving size, and then it just makes people connect with lots of beautiful things. So we can do that, and I'm going to lay out how, and that we have been doing it for 10 years, and we're expanding our capacity to do it, and we want to help others do that as well. So there's an 85,000 acre preserve in Southern California called Wind Wolves, and they have 32,000 acres of certified organic pasture. They use cattle to maintain or to control an invasive species, a few invasive species, kind of in the preserve. This site has millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of flowers when it's blooming, and it's backed up to up here on the screen. Let's see, up here is nope, sorry, down here is national forest land. So there's a lot of opportunity to produce organic honey. In order to produce organic honey, you need basically 27 square miles of organic or unused pasture. And that is a tricky thing to find in the continental US. There are 4 certified organic beekeeping operations in the US, and they're all in Hawaii. But we are working slowly and surely on getting that standard more well-defined and testing that we can produce honey to that standard in the continental US. So working with Landon, he's the preserve manager at the Wildlands Conservancy of Wind Wolves. There are dynamics in the Central Valley that make it a bit of a political and practical challenge, but he's eager to get it going, and we're looking for the beekeeper who can really meet us where we're at and be willing to kind of invest in the timeline to produce the honey that will meet this standard, and know that it might not be achieved the first couple of years. But if we can do it, this would be the first certified organic honey in the continental US. So we think it's totally worth it. So we intend to place 100 to 400 hives on the preserve to make the first certified organic California honey ever. We will then make the first certified organic US mead ever. And that's a lot of organic pasture, but there are places in other parts of the US where we think we could do it, and there are partners who are interested, but we want to get this test accomplished first so that we have a rubric to kind of apply to these different areas. Hopefully this helps shift the beekeeping business model, helping some part of the beekeeping business model where pollination is the primary income to see that honey production can be a viable income generator for a livelihood and a business. Right now, guys are putting their beehives on the back of semi-trucks like this down here. And that is just a pretty demanding way to create a livelihood. And it's really rough on the bees. They're planning on losing anywhere from 30 to 50% of their hives every year. And they just got an operation. The guys that are able to sustain the effort have basically a bee breeding operation back at their home base, where they're just manufacturing hives year round to replace the hives they plan on losing. So what if we could have a middle class of beekeepers where instead of needing 1,000 hives or more to make that pollination service model work, what if they could have 500 or fewer to focus on honey production and therefore make the money that they need to keep their operations in business and keep their bees healthier? That's what we want to see happen within the beekeeping world impact. So the Conservancy is excited about this. There's an opportunity to kind of tell their story and demonstrate that preservation, conservation, and regenerative ag can work together to meet each other's mission and further it. And we hope that there are opportunities to kind of replicate this throughout the US. We've talked to folks at Farmland LP and Organic Valley, the giant milk co-op. They're all open to working with us once we get this rubric figured out. So we got to get this first project underway and successful, and then hopefully we can take it to the next level. So we make the mead, and we want to share it with all of California and beyond. We want to partner with other people who want to make mead in their regions and share it in their regions. California's got a huge wine drinking economy. I think we consume like $500 million of sparkling wine a year. So we've got plenty of space in the market for a delightful, light, effervescent, honey-based kind of champagne, for lack of a better word. That's kind of our style. Mead can be dozens of styles. It's really fun how many directions you can take mead. So you can craft varieties that fit different segments of the market and not really be competing with each other. Hopefully just stealing share from extractive alcohol. But we want to see this network kind of expand, and we have a term for it. We call it the global regenerative mead ecosystem. We spent 10 years perfecting the craft, figuring out a ton about yeast fermentation, honey fermentation, and yeast kinetics. We've worked with UC Davis to start a course, a series of courses now, where students from all over the world fly to UC Davis, one of the top, if not the top, fermentation universities in the world, in order to take courses on mead, everything from Mead 101, where you get to make a batch of mead and learn the basics, to Mead 301, where you're talking with Ken Schramm, who wrote the book on mead making, about the intricacies of ester and other flavor byproduct productions that come as a side product of yeast fermentation, and how critical these things are to making excellent mead. So if people are interested in that, that's a great resource to kind of take your mead knowledge from 0 to 100. And I'm also available to help people walk that path. So we like to think of this whole vision as a win between the bees, the beekeepers, the land conservancies or the land stewards, the meaderies, the investors who partner with us to make this happen, the consumers who get to buy alcohol that helps heal the earth and keep the bees well, and then for the earth itself, increasing the earth's capacity to support life. So, people talk about win-win propositions, but we've got 7 wins here, which is exciting. So we've got increased capacity. If people want to grow with us, we're, a small, closely held company, and we can have those conversations. We love people who are passionate, who have experience in business, who want to see a regenerative product get more traction and change the face of the earth, really. We've got a couple of big projects that are close to being completed, and if we can pull them off, it would really change our business. So it's an exciting time to be in the mead biz, and if people wanted to talk more about that, be happy to connect about that. And we've got some new branding and packaging rolling out so that we can kind of meet the market more where it's gone or where it's going. And these are our values, our mission and our vision. We really want to light up people's lives with regenerative mead, and we want to see the beer and wine markets get replaced with regenerative options like our mead, so that alcohol production can support a thriving, diversified agriculture system and help the honeybees. So we have a foot in the door with some exciting partners, and we have a pretty good reputation. We can ship direct to customers in 37 states. So if people just want to hop on our website and order mead, they're more than welcome to do that too. And, if you have a mission where you could see regenerative mead having an impact, we'd love to have a conversation with you. One of the funnest facts to share about mead is that the bees have to visit 2 million flowers to make the honey that goes into a pound jar. Your typical 1 pound jar of honey. The bees are visiting 2 million flowers to gather that nectar and turn it into honey. So when you do the math on a bottle of mead this size, we used about 1/3 of a pound in this bottle of mead, 1/3 of a pound of honey. So that means over 600,000 flower visits in this bottle, which means there's about 3 glasses of mead in here. So about 200,000 flower visits per glass. And that means per sip, about 10,000 flower visits. So over the course of an evening, people can drink tens to hundreds of thousands of flowers. And we like to say that that connects them, with those flowers, with those bees, with the microbes that fermented the mead, and then with the sun that gave the energy to those plants to photosynthesize the water and the carbon dioxide into sugar. So through mead, you're connecting with all of the worlds that we share this world with: the animal world, the plant world, the microbial world, and the celestial world. And then you're connecting with human creativity and human history going back to 9,000 years ago, like 7,000 BC, archaeological evidence in Jehu, China, that people were drinking mead. And then in India, people were drinking mead, mentioning in the Rig Veda. In Africa, it could go back like 10 to 20,000 years. They were probably drinking out of animal skins or woven reed baskets, so that archaeological evidence has decayed. But since the African diaspora happened and you didn't need agriculture to make alcohol back then, you just probably found a beehive that flooded and spontaneously fermented. It's not a stretch to say that mead was what people were drinking back then. So, and then of course, Europe, Scandinavia, people are drinking mead. And even in Central America, there's a mead tradition from the stingless Melipona bee. So we want people to rediscover these traditions and connect with others through them and drink the change they want to see in the world. And when you drink mead, you get to share, this is 10,000 flowers in one sip. The place that this honey came from is represented by this mead. So if you like this mead, you're really saying that you like this place. And so you can create a direct connection, and literally the chemistry that is going into people's bodies is becoming a part of them. So it's a fun way to tell these stories and inspire people. So if you guys have ideas for how we might work together to transform the food system and regenerate the world, let me know. This is my email, frankgolbeck@goldencoastmead.com, and be happy and open to any ways you might want to connect.
Frank, that was awesome. I've been having some cool little sideline conversations with Michael here. He's agreed he'll come on and speak with us also. Tell us a little bit about what is different in the fermentation process, and then let's just say the actual beverage production than it might be for wine or beer or any other kind of distillation and fermentation.
Yeah. So that's an important point to clarify to start out, right? The difference between a primary fermentation and then a secondary distillation. So the act of converting sugar into alcohol is fermentation, and that's where yeast eat the sugar in a juice or a sweet, watery mix, and then turn it into alcohol. Then you would distill that, you would boil it, and the boiling point of alcohol is lower than water. So you could capture that distillate and then have it distilled. So we don't worry about distilling our mead, even though some people do that, and it's a whole ball of wax that we don't need to get into. We'll just focus on the primary fermentation. So in this way, mead is similar, a cousin really, of beer, wine, hard cider, sake, right? It's the same process, but it's really cool because there's nothing to hide behind when you make mead. Beer is like a stew. When you make beer, you've got hops in there, you've got maltose and dextrose and these non-fermentable complex carbohydrates that kind of hide flaws. And so you can be an all right beer maker and make very drinkable beer relatively easily. The difficulty is in the brewing, the first stage, but the fermentation, you don't really worry about it. With wine, it's like a soup. You got tannins and acids from the grapes and the skins of the grapes. They kind of create some structure and some veil to kind of hide flaws during the fermentation, but it's a little bit thinner. With mead, it's like a broth, like a very thin substrate, and really it's the aromas of the honey that produce the primary flavor components of your mead, and the yeast will then eat through these components in the honey and convert some of them into very noticeable esters, polyphenols, things that you can smell and taste that would otherwise be hidden in a wine or a beer. So your honey choice and your yeast choice really create this synergy. And if something goes off because the yeast is stressed due to heat or malnourishment or insufficient oxygenation, you can get like really intense bad flavors. And that's the main job of the mead maker, is to make sure that the conditions for the yeast fermentation are as beneficial as possible, so that those yeast do their job and finish that fermentation with like as healthy and clean of a outcome as possible. And then the flavor profile of the honey will shine through, and hopefully you'll get like a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts. You'll get a mead that represents that honey and those floral botanicals in a really beautiful and compelling way.
Very cool. Frank, Michael has a question, which I'm guessing he knows the answer, but he wants you to answer. How many flowers in a bottle of mead?
Yeah. Well, it depends on the size of your bottle and the recipe that you use. For our stuff, which is about 12% ABV, a 16.9 ounce, 500 milliliter bottle has 600,000 flowers, but a 750, it would be about this size, so I'm drinking water out of it, would be 1 million flowers. So we use about a half of a pound of honey in one of these with 2 million flowers in a pound. That means 1 million flowers in this bottle, or 1 million flower visits.
And I noticed that bottle looked very, very clear, very little coloration. It seemed like the other bottle had, so that there must be some variation. Yeah, look at what you have there. So.
Well, this is just water. I'm just using it as a water bottle. When these guys are filled up, mead is typically a nice golden amber color, kind of like that slide of all the meads lined up from kind of dark to light. That's okay. Where your color profile is going to be for your mead.
What other ingredients would you are there in mead that might not be in wine, beer, in a brewing process, or are there anything?
Oh, it's so cool.
The honey itself.
Yeah, you can go so many directions with mead, and that's one of the fun ways to play with regionality and unique offerings that no one else can touch, because there's an old tradition of adding herbs and spices to mead to make a variant called metheglin, which is an old Welsh term that shows up in Shakespeare and Chaucer and all kinds of historical record. But basically, it was what people are drinking for medicine before modern medicine. You took a fermented mead and you add spices and herbs, and like the medicine lady of your town would administer it to you and your community when people were falling sick. So you can add all kinds of spices and herbs and make all kinds of different concoctions, or I mean, really, they're like potions. It's pretty great. And some of my favorites include like mace, cardamom, and ginger, nutmeg and rose. I mean, you can just like go all kinds of directions. We do like Aussie savory peppers and black pepper and ginger. I mean, turmeric. You know, you can just like, as big as your imagination is, you can iterate and come up with recipes that you love and love to share with people. And that's one of the guiding principles in the mead world. There's a wonderful lady named Susan Rudd who runs a meadery up in Fargo, North Dakota, and she likes to say, there's the meads you like, and the meads your customers like, and then the meads that win awards. And so this kind of makes a Venn diagram, right? And if you try to find that like little trifecta where all three of those circles overlap, you're going to drive yourself crazy. But if you focus on the part where you like it and your customers like it, that means you're going to get to do what you love, and your customers are going to keep you in business. So focus on those two circles overlapping, and do things that no one else can do. One of the cool things is you can add fruit to mead too. So if you're running a regenerative farm and you can produce a certain kind of fruit and you can produce honey, you could make a product from your farm and know that this thing could not have existed anywhere else in the world, and therefore sell your bottle as a product, like a visit to the farm that people can take without having to fly to you, right? So ship them the bottle and then they can drink your farm.
Cool. Why do you think, by the way, everybody, put some questions in. Don't be shy. Let your fingers do some typing. Kate's got one here that I'll ask in just a second. But why do you think that mead has not, in the modern world, taken off in the same way, obviously, beers and wines? What is that? That must be a discussion topic amongst mead makers all the time.
Totally. And luckily, it's starting to evolve. When I started 10 years ago, there were no other meaderies in Southern California. We were the first. Now there are, I think, 13. So it's starting to pick up and take off. But the main barrier was quality. We didn't understand the science behind mead fermentation. You'd talk to the wise old guys at Scott Labs that produce a ton of yeast and sell materials to the winemaking industry, and they'd kind of be like, oh yeah, mead, that's a tricky one. So then Ken Schramm wrote the book, The Complete Mead Maker, and that really took us from the Renaissance Fair to a avid hobbyist kind of world. So a bunch of engineers started getting into it, and biotech type people, and they started really crunching the analysis on like yeast kinetics and yeast health, and then kind of distilled it down to some formulas, some recipes that really increase the likelihood that you're going to have healthy fermentations and therefore avoid stinky meads that needed to be aged for like 5 years before they were drinkable. So with those methods in place and some competitions to reward those who are putting in place, there's kind of a rapid adoption. And now we've got like 350 or 400 meaderies in the US, and there's like another 50 in progress or something like that. And it's starting to pick up. And I think also the education of the drinker is starting to seek those new things and those high quality but reliable things and things that have great stories. So I think mead is on the rise, and hopefully we can see that trend continue for the benefit of all those 7 partners that I mentioned above. Awesome.
Well, Kate's got a comment/question here. Great to see your work, and also that you're moving away from intensive beekeeping. Just wondering if you are also recognizing native bees and other pollinators in your system, as they are such an important part of the local ecosystem. So that's the question. And then she goes on and says, in New Zealand, like the US, honeybees are not native and can put the native species under pressure, but I think there is room for both if the honeybees are managed well.
Yeah, Kate, that is a emerging question that merits a lot more research, and it's quite a challenge, right? Because we've got thousands of native pollinators, and we've got this one little bee that like our whole modern agricultural system depends on. So if we want to have all these non-native invasive food crops, either we need honeybees pollinating them, or we need people in the fields hand pollinating crops like they do in parts of China where bees can't live. So they literally have people with like jars of pollen around their neck and little paintbrushes, and then they're hand pollinating stone fruit and apples and that kind of thing, which is just wild. So we've kind of created this system to be dependent upon bees, but we don't understand the impact fully that honeybees have on native bees, which have co-evolved. Sometimes there's one pollinator for one native plant, and the impact of a managed honeybee hive moving into that ecosystem is kind of a gamble. Are they competitive? Are they synergistic? Are they parasitic in some way? It's like it's a case by case basis, or a situation by situation. And Marla Spivak, who won the MacArthur Genius Award at the University of Minnesota for her research on honeybees, she likes to say, the cat's kind of out of the bag on the European honeybee. And we've got to figure out ways for both native pollinators and European honeybee to thrive, because we need them both. So let's direct our research efforts towards optimizing that. And I've seen a little bit of research out of the UC Berkeley Small Farm Center about how if you have pollinator gardens and pollinator hedgerows in your farm context, and you provide habitat for mason bees and carpenter bees and other native pollinators, leafcutter bees, there is a good chance that, well, what did the research say? That when you manage for both, it increases the presence of both and it increases the yield on the farms. So that was just one small study. I would love to see more research in that area, but that's totally the direction I would love to see this all go, where we manage for both, we increase the well-being of both, and that increases our yields on our farms and decreases our inputs.
I was looking down because I have a next kind of cool comment question from Silas. First he asked, he says, have you talked with the folks at Rincon Vitova?
So Rincon Vitova does this great parasitic intervention for pests. So using biological control methods to control pests on farms, whether that's ladybugs and mantises or way more esoteric species of pest managing insects, and including like funguses and other things that can kill stuff. And my understanding is that he's, man, what's his name? He's a wild man. Well, the principal at Rincon Vitova and I spoke a few years ago about biological methods to control varroa mite, which is like the major mite that predates the European honeybee. And he's like, oh yeah, we've got a fungus that takes care of that, no problem. But none of the big guys want to use it because that would cut into their miticide sales. So, that was the extent of our conversation. If we get this organic project up and running and we need to control mite, that would be a huge resource, and it's just over the hills from the test site, so it could make a lot of sense.
This guy you're talking about might be the second part of his comment here, which he said, also, I'd love to put you in touch with We Save the Bees / Bee-Man Dan in San Diego.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. The guy? Or...
No, Bee-Man Dan's different. He's like a kung fu beekeeper. He's brilliant. He works with all these, we call them feral hives down here in Southern California. We have a lot of Africanized honeybee genetics, and they're kind of intense and kind of aggressive. But Bee-Man Dan is this like kung fu practitioner, and he keeps these bees without gloves, and it is like watching poetry in motion when he is beekeeping.
Wow.
Yeah.
Kate said thank you for the answer that you had, and good to hear. And she said in New Zealand, hives are put in national parks.
Cool. Cool. Wouldn't that be awesome? I mean, I would love to find those kinds of partnerships once this project is proven and taken off, because then we could like have honey from Yosemite Valley, so maybe one day. So
we're not close, we still got a little time, so folks throw some more questions in, but one more from me. What can we do, and our little community's growing, Frank, we've got almost 30,000 people now, and a lot more people will watch this as replay than watch it live. What can we all do to help you? What kinds of things, just generally, can the members of the EAT community do to help?
Great, thanks, Wayne.
Yeah, not just you. Let's say the meat industry, probably.
And the bees, and So your community is tapped into the regenerative spectrum, and I think becoming aware of the capacity of mead to kind of move our whole culture that's connected to food and by extension alcohol in that regenerative direction is, I think, a big lever to start putting into the machine and pushing in that direction. So if your community can start, thinking about mead, asking for mead, supporting meaderies in their regions that are thinking these kinds of thoughts and doing these kinds of things. I mean, I even think that if it's commodity mead, it's better for the bees and better for our ecosystems, because rather than a downward pressure on domestic honey as a result of international competition over honey sales and kind of a race to the bottom, which the beekeepers have been experiencing for the last couple of years on price. The biggest buyers are really just going on price, and it is putting major downward pressure on the beekeepers who do count on sales of honey for a significant part of their revenue, about 20% of their revenue, which is basically their profit margin. If mead is increasing, that is an upward pressure on that price, which is making those beekeepers' jobs a bit easier to keep their businesses going. So I think even commodity mead is a step in the right direction for bees and beekeepers. But then the next step in my mind would be craft mead, where some level of intention and love is put into some part of the process. And through that, we can iterate and make the whole system better. And then the kind of the platinum standard, if you will, is the regenerative mead, where every step in the producer web, from the beekeeper to the landowner to the mead maker, all of them are paying attention to their impacts on the system, and they're striving to make that system more capable of creating life. And so if your communities understands what that means, and they're starting to help by either asking for that kind of mead or finding it or sharing it with their friends and educating through it in a really fun and positive way, that can shift this whole thing in that direction. Looking at commodity beer that's based off monoculture as like the smoking of the 2000s, like in 1950, smoking was cool. And then we realized that smoking kills us and kills everybody that does it. So will that be like monoculture and monoculture alcohol going forward? And can mead kind of help us bridge that gap from where we are today to that more ideal future? With the help of 30,000 people who are tapped in, I could see that happening a lot sooner.
Super. Great answer. Michael's just coming up with great questions.
I wish I could see him.
Are you making a I might pronounce this wrong, but he says, are you making a Brago or Bragat yet? He has 3 questions here. So that's the first. Second is, are you using top bar hive still? And third is, what is your favorite mead? Start with the last one. That's the most fun of all.
Thanks, man. Yeah. So this bottle is from our Wildflower Sour, and our Wildflower Sour is from a Brazilian organic honey. So the beekeepers are down in Brazil floating hives on barges down the Amazon River, and the bees are flying like 3 miles out from the hive on the barge into the Amazon rainforest, bringing back honey. And so these honeys are just all over the map. This last batch is this bright citrusy with this underlying kind of like smokiness and wildness to it. And we use a lactobacillus ale yeast co-fermentation, and between those two, it just makes this really bright, effervescent, tart, dynamic, refreshing, but also deep mead at 12%. So 1 or 2 glasses between me and my wife just makes a beautiful, relaxed evening. And really love that one. We call it the Wildflower Sour. And then, and you can get that online, actually. What else makes me, all right, the other 2 questions. Braggot was the first one, and what was the middle?
Braggot. Are you making a Braggot yet? And then are you still using top bar hives?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Yeah, thanks, Wayne, too. So a Braggot is tricky. So we're licensed as a winery, and so we're not supposed to touch grain. And so we follow that rule. We have done a collaboration with Stone Brewing down here, where we made a Braggot at their brewery, called it Bragdoff, the Bragdoff the Gold, I think. And it was epic. It was really rich, and it was like an imperial porter with honey. And I think it was 10.5 ABV, super caramely, malty, dark, delicious, roasty. It was like drinking it was like, I don't know. It was really good. but we can't do it legally, so it's kind of at the whim of Stone, and they've got plenty to worry about right now. Uh, so do every local brewery right now. And then top bar hives. I have one top bar. I have one wild hive right now. It literally moved into a tire and it's a feral hive. And so I just put some boards up on the side and it is thriving. So those are my two hives right now. I'm really more of a bee haver these days than a beekeeper because the meadery is keeping me so busy and the kids. Trying to keep my wife happy with all of my projects. So that's the extent of my beekeeping right now. But I got to say that the tire hive is doing great.
The tire hive. I want to see a picture of that.
Yeah. Funny.
So this picture of your family here, how recent is that? Are the kids about that age, or is it?
No, that's about 2 years ago. So youngest is 3, and then 5 and 7. So they're much more.
Can't tell the sex of the youngest in this picture.
Girls, 3 girls.
All 3. All right. Wow. I have 3. Do have a boy though too, so got the other end covered a little.
Nice. Yeah.
And yours are about the same ages apart as my 3 girls are. So the teens will be an exciting time for you.
Yeah, I'm planning on them like joining a beekeeping monastery.
Well, anybody else have any questions? We are at the top of the hour. This has been an amazing session. It's awesome because it sounds like Frank is going to be willing to come on with us. Michael is going to be willing to come on with us. And we already have Silas signed up. He's going to come and talk to us sometime here in the near future. And Frank, thanks so much. That was so great. Thank you for taking your time. And again, everybody, go drink mead, not water, not beer. So that's the way, one of the big way we can help and promote it to others. So, Mark or Reed, you guys have any questions? They usually mute themselves. So
I don't have.
Anyway, Mark, why don't you take us out? Frank, thank you again so much.
Pleasure. Thanks, guys.